you don't learn about people. I probably could have benefited from taking some psychology classes in college and maybe getting some, professional mentoring and coaching help early on to learn the appropriate way to speak with people and motivate people, and kind of guide them through the process. I will say that I believe today I guess I'm in my late 50s now. I'm more open-minded and less rigid than I may have been when I was in my 20s or 30s, starting off as a manager. I'm more open to listen to people. I'm more open to hear their ideas. I'm more open to let them try their ideas, uh, to do things. And I think that if I had that approach earlier, it may have been more helpful for me to get to where I am quicker.
Matthew Jarmel is an accomplished American architect and real estate developer, serving as president of Jarmel Kizel Architects and Engineers. A top graduate from NJIT School of Architecture, Matt also holds an MBA with a focus on real estate development and urban land use from Rutgers University. With extensive experience in commercial design, multifamily housing, office spaces, and early education centers, Matt combines his architectural expertise with strong capabilities in land entitlement and real estate financing. In addition to advising clients through complex development processes, he develops projects independently. As a recognized authority in his field, Matt has testified as an expert witness on land planning and development and contributed his insights to leading publications such as the New York Times, NJ Biz, and the Real Estate Weekly. Let's unravel the fingerprints on success of Matthew Jarmel. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the show, Fingerprints on Success. I'm glad you could join us today. Today, I have my friend and longtime colleague, Matt Jarmel, the CEO of Jarmel Kizel Architects and Engineers. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bill. Hope all's
Really
well.
glad yeah, thank you, and really glad that you could join us. Matt, for our audience out there, which is primarily made up of entrepreneurs and business owners, tell everybody a little bit about your background. How you got started and kind of the history of Jarmel Kizel, so people can really understand what you guys do.
I'd be very pleased to do that. So, in simple terms, I'm an architect, and Jarmel Kizel is both an architectural and engineering firm. Its history has roots that date back to 1975, which kind of talks about how I got involved. Is my dad founded the firm. My dad, Marvin Jarmel, who I'm fortunate to still have, he's 89 years old, is an interior designer by education, and he started his firm as an entrepreneur. It's an interesting story. He had a very high-paying job back in the mid-'70s running facilities for a major corporation, and he started to moonlight and ultimately resigned from his position to start the business in the basement of our home. Initially, the firm did commercial interiors, office fit-up, and I think my dad had this vision for my brother and I, for one of us to be a doctor and one to be a lawyer. So, Bill, I could have been a partner at your firm.
See
but
that?
instead, my brother Richard decided to become a civil engineer, and I decided to become an architect. And we both landed up working for our father in the early '90s. My dad, around that time, recruited a gentleman by the name of Erwin Kizel, who's been a friend and mentor ever since, to join the firm because Erwin's an architect and a planner. And my dad was very good and probably still is very good if we let him work at doing corporate interiors. He was neither an architect nor an engineer. So we brought Erwin in to somewhat mentor Richard and I. And the four of us worked very hard through the '90s, first converting the firm into what I would call a general practitionership of architectural and engineering services, where we kind of came out of doing interiors of buildings and started to design new buildings and all types of buildings. And then as time went on, we saw, we'll say, an opportunity in the marketplace. A lot of people think that architects are the only ones needed to design buildings, but the truth is architects need to collaborate with engineers and all types of different kinds of engineers, like civil engineers that design sites, structural engineers that design the structure of the building, mechanical and electrical, and so on. And traditionally, either the owner hires them as a separate consultant or the architect hires them as sub-consultants. So we made a decision in, say, the late '90s to start an engineering group. First, we started with mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and over the years added other disciplines. So today, The firm's 49 years old. Next year, it'll be 50 years old, exciting time. And we stand as a firm with close to 70 people with the ability to provide multiple services, architectural, structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing design, and structural design. And we're active in what I'd call many verticals of real estate development. We like to be generalists as opposed to specialists, because we were specialists before it was cool to be specialists when we were an interiors firm. Still can do interiors very well, but we do a lot of other things very well, such as educational projects, multifamily housing, industrial. Those are sort of the big markets in our industry right now, but we've got experience in retail, new office buildings, and so on.
Did you always know that you'd go to work with your dad, or was that, did you start somewhere else first?
Well, put it this way. I think I always knew I was going to be an architect. It was not only did my dad involved in the design industry. My dad was very hands-on. So growing up, he would renovate our houses when we bought houses and rip out the kitchen and rebuild it. So from a very young age, I was exposed to construction, and I like it, enjoy it, watching it, and kind of gets my juices flowing, especially when we see buildings take shape. So I would say that at a really young age, I knew I was going to do something in the, we'll say, real estate construction industry for sure.
Yeah. And
Now, I'm sorry, you asked if I worked anywhere else. The answer is yes, I did. I did some short stints, more when I was a student and interning at both small architectural firm, a one-man shop. I worked for an engineering firm, and at the time, I worked for one of the largest firms in New Jersey, if not the country, for a short period of time. And what I really enjoyed being in those places is sort of a fly on the wall. So I was inexperienced, but I knew where I wanted to go. So I listened to what was happening around me and found it very interesting, which, by the way, I'm an advocate of working in the office as opposed to hybrid. So you can learn and be mentored.
Okay. Well, it's funny. We just did a show just a couple of days ago. And when we talked about kind of like, I'll call it current events or like what's going on, my guest talked a lot about the being in the office thing. It was a big part of the conversation. And it's interesting. A lot of entrepreneurs are bringing that up lately about how important they feel it is to have their people back and in the office full time. So it's funny you should mention it. So tell me about what's it like, in essence, to go to work initially for your dad and then become partners with your dad? Was that always great and easy? Did it have its challenges? Like, did you always feel you were aligned? Like, what was that like?
So it's very challenging to work with family. And in my case,
and you got your brother too. So
right,
it's not just your
my
dad.
father and my brother. And although we're in what I would call aligned professions, we're all different professionals. We have an interior designer, an engineer, and an architect. So we all have different, we'll say, skill sets that are supposed to work together and complement each other. But at the same time, there's conflict between them. And sometimes that causes tension. But at one point, before my brother Richard and I were, we'll say, out of the house, we were graduated college, we weren't married, and we were all living at the house. It was very interesting for my mom because she would get upset because we talk business at the table. And that's the worst thing you can do, by the way. Anybody that's living with family or engaged with family in business, if you're outside the office, leave the office in the office. But the one thing that you could always do is we all knew each other better than anybody could ever know anybody. And we trusted each other. And, when we had to make sacrifices in bad times, we made sacrifices. And in good times, when we could be rewarded, we rewarded ourselves equally. And I think from that standpoint, it works really well. The interesting thing is we had a fourth partner, as you're aware, Mr. Kizel, not a family member, but might as well have been over the years, the way it's grown together.
That's that's the family dynamic is always a fun thing to ask about because you're basically a Thanksgiving table, any table, whatever's it's always coming up because as entrepreneurs, it's part of your life. It's part of your DNA and who you are is also your business. At what point along the journey did you take the business over in terms of being like, the leader of the organization?
Um, Probably earlier than I should have. My dad, I mentioned earlier, he's 89. My dad worked pretty much up until he was 83 or 84 years of age in different forms. Almost right up to COVID, he was still working, coming in 3 days a week. And what happened in I would say the early days of my existence in the firm is as we started the transition out of just being corporate interiors and more into a general practitionership of architectural services, because I was the architect, I kind of took the lead there. And I ended up sort of becoming, chief cook and bottle washer, where I was selling, I was making presentations, I was designing, I was drawing, and I also had a business background because I also have an MBA, so I was sort of kind of leading the charge. I always think that my father was a very talented designer and was really good at working the project. And I really respected his entrepreneurial spirit, but he didn't have the business, we'll say, experience to understand organizational structure and how to grow a business. So where his focus, as I became, we'll say, more senior in the organization, I started to focus on working the company as opposed to working the project, and he stayed behind and worked on projects that were within his wheelhouse of expertise. Because once you come out of the corporate interiors world and you start talking about structures and mechanical systems and designing buildings, that was outside of what he was trained to do and doing.
Yeah. So, you've reached, for especially, when you look at architectural engineering firms, to be a firm of over 70 people, a very sizable organization doing, major projects. Do you think there's certain kind of philosophies, especially since that growth has happened on your watch? Um, do you think there's certain mindsets or philosophies that you had, whether you knew it at the time or not, that you think really made
Um,
a contribution to that?
Absolutely, I'll tell you one thing I'm very proud of. I follow an economic indicator called the AIA Billing Index, which is done by the American Institute of Architects, and it shows they measure things like productivity in firms, new proposals going out, and billing. And unfortunately, the industry's had a 20-month consecutive decline in billing and new opportunities. Our firm has not. If anything, we've experienced growth and we've held our own, which we're very proud of. And I'm saying, what are we doing that's special? And I credit it to the fact that we're multidisciplined and we're designing projects in multiple verticals. So we're very diverse in the way that we approach services and projects. And I learned at a very early age, and you heard me say that earlier that we were specialists before it was cool to be specialist. In our industry, when you're a specialist and the economy goes bad, not only is your work drying up, but if you're doing interiors, maybe schoolwork's drying up, maybe office buildings, maybe retail. And if you've never worked in those verticals, you're not getting a job. So my success in keeping the firm busy is making sure we're in as many verticals as possible and offering as many services as possible in those verticals.
So to do that, do you have to bring in various people who are specialists in the different verticals
Uh,
to
uh,
keep expanding?
Absolutely. And it's not, design is a process. And if you understand the process, similar with construction, you and know how to ask the questions of items you don't need, you can pretty much design anything. Now, granted, no one's hiring you to design a 100-story building if you've never designed one. Our tallest, by the way, is 16 stories, and just completed a 16-story, 230,000 square foot building in New Brunswick. We're very proud of. But you need specialists, but you also need specialists not just in we'll say design verticals of product type, but in certain services. And the other thing I learned, I think, at an early point in my career is most architects graduate architectural school and think you're good, you're going to go design a building. Of course, you have to intern for 3 years, take a test, and then you think you're good. But the reality of it is, architects are generalists. We know a little bit about every building system, and it's our job to coordinate the work of the specialists, which is the engineers, to put it all together. As an example, I might have mechanical engineer working for me that, we might be renovating a building and they'll say, hey, we have to put a new system on the roof. He won't think about the fact that we have to cut a hole in the roof and maybe put some steel in to support the unit. So it's my job to make sure the structural engineer does that and coordinates it. And I think that by, we'll say, being diverse in the way we approach things, it's allowed us to be successful and stay busy in both good times and bad times.
Have you found it's hard? A lot of our our clients and folks that have come on the show have talked about the difficulty in finding the talent. Have you found in your space that's a challenge, and how
It
have you
it
dealt with it?
it it's extremely challenging to find good talent. And by the way, both in good times and bad. One of the things that I find is, first of all, studying architecture and engineering is really, really hard. And if you're not, we'll say, business minded, you're not necessarily gonna you'll earn a comfortable living, but you're not going to get super rich unless you really understand how the business and the industry works. So the challenge is not only finding somebody that has the architectural engineering skills, we'll say the business mindset to know how to kind of talk to the clients and work with them. But because the schooling is so hard, and you make, let's say, less than someone with maybe comparable schooling, like yourself, Bill, as an attorney, and don't make as much money, a lot of people will not study this industry. So there's been a decline in certainly in the United States in the amount of people that study architecture and engineering, which makes the talent pool smaller. How do we deal with it? We have a new way. In the past, we worked with recruiters. We spent a small fortune, probably close to 5% of our gross billings last year with recruiters. And we
Wow,
finally broke
that's
down.
material. That's
Yeah.
significant.
And we finally broke down and hired an in-house recruiter. She's been with us, I don't know, 2 or 3 months, and she's
Hmm.
already successfully hired about 3 people. One of the things, by the way, that's also challenging is coming out of COVID. A lot of people wanted to go hybrid, as we started to talk about earlier, and we lost staff because we insisted on being here. We're flexible with hours. Sometimes we let somebody work from home a day or week or something if there's certainly a
Sure.
family issue or they're traveling far. But I want people here because it's all about collaboration. And so that just is an added, we'll say, difficulty in both keeping and recruiting. But we work through it. I'm proud to say that we have, staff that's been here over 20 years and certain people.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people feel that way, and the challenges are out there. I was recently talking to someone who runs a fairly sizable accounting firm, and it was interesting. Within a course of a few week period, I had a conversation with someone where everyone's in the office, and I had a conversation with someone where people are out of the office, and it was just interesting to hear the difference. In one case, they're recruiting from a relatively regional pool because they've got to get people obviously that are within reasonable commutes to their office. And in the other case, they were talking about the fact that they had accountants working for them that were literally in like 10 different states. And and they were only coming in for like these two semi-annual, in-person big
Meetings.
meetings that they would put together. So just kind of
So
interesting to
yeah,
see
a
the
little
difference.
off topic to kind of go in this direction, but I find teamwork versus individual work. You can work from home as an individual if you're, sort of a one-man band. But when you're part of an integrated team where you rely on team members to get your job done, it's better just to be able to get up from your desk and walk around. Nothing makes me, we'll say, happier or prouder when I walk through the office and I see a senior associate sitting with a junior staffer or a new or recent graduate sitting at their desk in front of a screen and talking. I mean, it's like they're learning, they're teaching, they're mentoring, and it just makes for a better product for us to develop.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we have similar experiences. So when you think about, you've had this period of time now. You joined the business with your dad, eventually took the business over. Now you've grown it exponentially. Um, if you were kind of advising yourself, Matt today is advising Matt from 15 years ago of what to do and not to do, or mistakes that to avoid. What What are some things that you would have done differently?
Um, that's a hard question. I think I would have.
By the way, somebody just lost a presidential election because they answered this question wrong.
I understand. Um, you know, Hindsight's always 2020. And I think that one of the things that I could have benefited more from, and you don't get this in technical school, and I don't know if you get it in law school either, is that you don't learn about people. I probably could have benefited from taking some psychology classes in college and maybe getting some, professional mentoring and coaching help early on to learn the appropriate way to speak with people and motivate people, and kind of guide them through the process. I will say that I believe today I guess I'm in my late 50s now. I'm more open minded and less rigid than I may have been when I was in my 20s or 30s. Starting off as a manager. I'm more open to listen to people. I'm more open to hear their ideas. I'm more open to let them try their ideas. Uh, to do things. And I think that if I had that approach earlier, it may have been more helpful for me to get to where I am quicker.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And sometimes giving people the room and the ability to succeed and fail,
Sure.
and to allow them to make mistakes. I mean, if it's not going to be catastrophic, um, is all part of the learning and growing process, right? And if you're going to build a team as an entrepreneur too, if you're going to build a team and maybe even want to have a life at some point, you got to have a lot of really good people who can actually take care of things for you and run with things so that you don't want to be the bottleneck, having to kind of review every single item that gets produced, and because that doesn't help
Very true. And
either.
you want to have a somewhat of a balanced work life, uh, you know, situation, which is probably hard for people like you and I who are running, organizations. But I enjoy spending time with my family and I enjoy traveling. And it's hard to do if you don't have a team you can trust and rely on.
We talked a little bit about collaboration and mentorship. I'm wondering, when you reflect on your career and your success, have there been mentors along the way, that when you look back, you say, but for the mentorship or the kind of the coaching I got from this person, maybe it wouldn't be it turned out as great as it's turned out.
Um, you know, Obviously working with my father, I consider my father a mentor. I consider my brother Richard a mentor because he's taught me a lot about his specific discipline in civil engineering. And I certainly consider Erwin Kizel a mentor who's really taught me most of or helped me grow into a really good architect. He's like a code guru, he's a great designer. And he knows how to, we'll say, navigate the bureaucracy sometimes of doing things like land entitlements and getting building permits. But outside of them, I don't think specifically about mentors, but I do. There are some, we'll say, people that have influenced me, and sometimes with a simple comment or that's driven me along. And I thought, I had an idea of some of the questions you were going to ask because your team shared that, and I thought about it a
Oh,
little.
wait a minute. They leaked my
They leaked,
info?
they
Come
leaked
on.
your info. I hope I'm okay saying that. So when I was in architectural school, I took an elective in real estate development. And I won't tell you the name of the gentleman, but he worked for a major real estate company in the 80s that unfortunately didn't survive the Resolution Trust Corporation takeover and banking problems of the early 90s. But he came into the class and he taught us how to develop a real estate pro forma for a project, understand what rent is, understand how buildings are valued based on income or based on cost. And he would come in and basically say, architects don't understand what it costs to build a building. And you know what? That's true, but that's not the real problem. The real problem is that architects frequently don't understand why they're even designing a building. You might be saying, hey, I'm designing an office building or I'm designing a retail building, but if they're working or an apartment building, but if they're working for a developer, they may not understand how the developer is making their money. Are they collecting rent? Are they a merchant builder? So this particular adjunct professor kind of taught me that or got my juices flowing about it. And it actually motivated me to not only finish architectural school, which I was going to do, but while I was interning and working on my license, I worked on an MBA with a concentration in real estate development and urban land use. And that degree and the knowledge I learned about real estate development by working on that degree has been invaluable to me as an architect, because it allows me to not only understand the economics of why we design buildings, not the economics of what it costs to build the building. That is obviously important and part of the equation. But why are we designing it? How is it going to generate money? What's it worth, and how are we creating value? And what's your client's goals? Because some of our clients build buildings and sell them as soon as they're done. They have a different goal than a client that's building the same exact building and wants to hold it for generations. In other words, they're going to spend money in a different way on the project. So that individual motivated me, that adjunct professor, to continue my education and learn more about, we'll say, the real estate economics of projects. Invaluable to me. I remember that very, very clearly. I have to look it up now, and I'm thinking, see if he's still around. And then there was actually a contractor, believe it or not, that kind of taught me a lesson at an early point in my career. There's this inherent conflict between design professionals and contractors, especially when you're doing what we call lump sum delivery. And because I entered a family business and my father's business was fairly established, not only was I exposed to things at an early part of my career, I was put in charge of things maybe before I should have been. And we were doing a corporate headquarters project, I'll tell you, for a company called Sealand, a shipping company, back in the early 90s. And there was a construction manager on the job, and everything ran very smoothly. And it wasn't that there weren't errors or mistakes. There were, like every construction project has. But he was about solving the problems. So when you sat in these owners contractor meetings, there was no tension. There was, here's an issue, this is what, and he came with a solution. And I went to him at the end of a meeting once, and I said to him, I'm really impressed with the way you run a project. I've never been on a project where there was no tension. And he said, that's because my job is not to make me look like a hero. My job is to make everybody at the table look like a hero. And that comment stuck with me. And I'm sorry it took a little while to get that out, but it stuck with me for, probably the last 25, 30 years of my career. That's one of my goals. Like I want to do a good job for everybody. And I want everybody to succeed at what they're there to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great things you said there, to unpack. Being a hero to other people is is a big, it's a huge thing in terms of not only clients, but even people that work for you. Kind of having that mindset or philosophy of being a hero to others is a huge thing.
And then not to kind of correct, but his goal wasn't to be a hero. His goal was to make everybody else look like a hero. So he wanted everybody to succeed. And by doing that, he did look like a hero.
Well, that's what I was saying, right? By solving all those problems,
solving problems and making people successful at what they were doing, he became a hero.
That's right. That's right. And the other
maybe
thing
not intentionally, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure the reason he kept sitting at those tables was because he was making people heroes, and that's why they kept bringing him back, right? The other thing that you said that I think is really important to hammer home is understanding the business or the dollars behind what you're doing, right?
Absolutely.
And I think for every professional, and this is where a lot of professionals can go wrong. I see it with lawyers all the time, right? Understanding like the why behind what I'm doing and the economics behind it. I remember I had a mentor in like the first year of my career practicing. I was at a worldwide law firm in New York City, and there was this very well-known attorney that I was a first year, and all the first years sat in a room together. And he walked into the room and he was teaching us like basic contracts. And he walked in, and I'll never forget. He said, "Follow the money, follow the money, follow the money." And I'm like and I'm writing, of course, like as like a typical newbie first year, I'm writing down on my piece of paper, follow the money, follow the money, follow. Like, why am I writing this down? And it stuck with me forever because we very quickly learned like everything you do is about in a professional service, it's about the money, right? So whether you're a lawyer, you're an accountant, you're an architect or engineer, if you don't understand the economics behind what you're doing and the dollars and really understand where all the values are, you really can't do the job that you need to do,
Very
right?
true.
Um, so how do you try to pay it forward to other people, right? So you had great people within your organization that made an influence. You had great people outside of your organization. What do you try to do to kind of keep that flowing forward?
Well, with our team, I want them to understand not only how we're designing projects, okay? Because they know how to design projects, but the why. What's our client's goal here? So that they can advise them and kind of guide them through a process. And I'll give an example is we design a lot of multifamily projects and we do them in all sorts of markets. We'll say different economic markets. New Jersey is a very diverse economic state, especially in Essex County, and you can have large differences between, uh, we'll say, economics from one town to the other within a mile or two of each other. And unfortunately, you might be doing the same product type in these opposing communities that are a mile apart, but because of the economics of the community, one building can't bear the same rent as the other. So you might use different materials. You still want it to be pretty, you still want it to be functional, of course, and safe. But a lot of architects would have a difficult understanding. Oh, it's the same product type. So it's not just designing the product type; it's understanding where you're designing the product type and understanding you know what's the rent your client can charge. Maybe he can charge $1,500 for a one bedroom apartment in this town. In this town he can charge 3,000, and as a result of that, maybe that unit can be a little bigger, or maybe that unit can have a granite countertop. So you need to be able to explain that sometimes, and sometimes the client knows, but you know as well as I do, when times are good, everybody wants to be a real estate developer.
Oh,
And
sure.
yeah, and you land up with, uh, listen, I have very sophisticated clients out there that build and build and build, multi-generational clients from their families that teach me things every day. And then I've got clients that it's their first time out of the gate and they need me to teach them. And that's what I want my team to be able to do is to educate the clients by asking the right questions and steering them along. I had a call this morning for a multifamily project, and I had to explain the affordable housing rules to the client and what is set aside would be and how that would work. And I know a lot of my competitors that design multifamily couldn't do what I just did. I did.
Yeah.
And I was very pleased to see that my colleague who designed the project for our firm was able to explain that too.
Yeah. Well, you made me think of a funny story. I was sitting at a conference room table, and this is going back. So this is the early 2000s, and there's a development boom on, right? I mean, people would build something, whether it be residential, commercial, and and before they could even finish it, it was worth 30-40% more than it was before they started it. And I remember sitting at a table and I had this client, and at the time I was a pretty young lawyer. I was a partner, but I was a young partner, and I had this client of the firm that I was working with on a project, and he was liquidating a number of properties and kind of going into cash on a number of things, and in essence, kind of like sitting on the sideline a little bit. And I remember thinking to myself, what's he doing? Does he just have so much money that he just doesn't really, he wants to slow down? Like I was trying to in my mind think about why would this guy, when everyone's just making tons of money and the prices are just going up and up for everything, why would he do this? And he
He's
looked at
waiting for
me.
the bubble to pop, right?
Well, so I asked him the question, because he was a really great guy and I knew I felt comfortable. So I said, why are we doing this? He said, listen, Bill, no offense, but when every lawyer I know and every accountant I know calls themselves a real estate developer, I know that Armageddon is approaching.
On
And
its
sure
way.
enough, by the way, about 12 months later, the world collapsed in like, '08, and properties were in foreclosure everywhere, and
Sure.
developers walked away from huge projects, and this guy he didn't lose a single project. He not only didn't lose any money, he had gone to cash. So then when things were in total dire straits, he went around and bought up properties for cents on the dollar. And I said, wow, okay. So remember when lawyers and accountants start calling themselves developers, the end is
And
near.
doctors as well,
That's
and,
right.
and arguably architects too. Real estate development, especially in our neck of the woods, is a very challenging process. There's limitations on land, and there's tremendous regulations and zoning regulations. And candidly, if you can develop or design a building and get it approved in New Jersey, you can do it anywhere. And we do have a national. We're only have one office, but we do work all over the country.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier than it is in New Jersey.
Yeah, I think that's right. With national, we have a national practice, and as you said, you do a lot of work in this region, but you do it all over the country as well. Um, and there's without a doubt, we say all the time, there's certain states where if a project or a deal or a business structure if you could do it in New Jersey, if you could do it in New York, if you could do it in California, the odds are you could probably do it in the
Do
other
it anywhere.
47 states. So
But they're catching up too.
yeah,
As some of those states grow and become more densely populated and traffic hits, a lot of NIMBYism, not in my backyard, kicks in.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah, and it's
we
funny
see a
too,
lot of.
because even in some of the what we call the business favorable states, which of course, which are also tax-free states, so states like Texas and Florida and others, it was the Wild West there for a while, and we're even seeing now that there's more regulation coming down and government bodies overseeing things, and the infrastructure of regulation, even in places that have always been deemed so business favorable. It's not like the states we're talking about, but it's creeping up, starting to move in a direction of more regulation and more government involvement in things. So Matt, question for you on kind of a hot topic for you. What you know, what's on your mind these days in terms of like the world as a whole, business as a whole, things that you think our entrepreneurs that are listening should be thinking about? What do I not to say what keeps you up at night, but maybe what's got you excited every day? Like what do you think people should be thinking about out there?
Well, you know, I'll answer two ways. One, an economic way, and the other probably ties back to economics. I'm excited to see interest rates going down. Okay, everything in my business relates to construction financing, and it's not just interest rates, because interest rates sometimes you can solve for the higher interest, but it's also leverage. What percentage of the cost will the bank do? So I'm excited to see that. I think 2025 is going to be a good year to build and borrow money. I'm optimistic about that. So I hope other people in the industry are as well, because we've seen a lot of projects that have been stuck because they couldn't make we'll say the matrix of the numbers work. But from a design standpoint, and an architect, one thing that I'm really excited about and have been for a long time is I think about energy and electricity a lot. Um, and I think that there's been a sustainable movement in building design going on now for at least 20 years. And I think that sometimes some of the programs out there are more about marketing and they trip over each other. But there's a real push to make buildings all electric, just like there is to make cars all electric. One, that excites me, and two, it scares me at the same time. It excites me obviously because there's a perception that we're not burning fossil fuels and polluting. We probably are burning more though, because the grid doesn't have enough power to probably power all our electric cars if we all drove electric cars, and take fossil fuels like natural gas, which burns pretty clean, away from doing heating. So I'm very sensitive to this, and I'm excited to tell you that we are working on a project that I can't tell you who because we have a confidentiality agreement, but we're doing a hydrogen fuel cell, which is basically a way to make clean power and have a building kind of self-sufficient. And our engineering departments are now kind of getting involved in what we might call these microgrid projects, where a campus or even a building has the ability to generate its own power. And not just, we've been doing solar for a long time, but solar is maybe part of the equation, but not the whole equation. So there's other ways to generate power that fascinate me. And I believe that someday buildings will be unplugged from the grid and learn to be, or not learn to be, but will have the technology to make them self-sufficient. I'm looking forward to implementing those technologies as they come alive in design.
That's very cool. The world is constantly changing, and that's we got to keep up with it. We always say, um, when you stop growing, you start dying, right? So,
Absolutely.
continuing to evolve, which is awesome. Well, Matt, listen, I want to just thank you for taking the time today to come on the show. It was great to learn as much as I know you and know about your company and your business. It's great to hear the stories and to learn more and to hear the great things that you're up to. It is no small feat to accomplish what you've done, which is to build, a not only incredibly reputable but a growing, significant architectural engineering firm that's practicing nationwide and continuing to grow. So I wish you luck with your continued success, and thanks again for coming on the show.
It's been my pleasure to be on here. I really enjoyed the conversation. I always enjoy speaking with you, Bill, and I just want to kind of reflect and say the same thing to you. I've known you many years, and it's been really exciting to watch you grow in your career and become CEO of a major law firm and do exciting things like these podcasts. So thank you so much for including me.
Thanks, Matt.